Okay, well, I just started the recording, and I think, Sasha, we'll just go ahead and admit people at the top of the hour. And I think Melinda just mentioned this, but because we do have this recorded, we just kind of let people trickle in when they can make it, and don't worry too much about whether or not folks have signed on or not. So.
Okay, that sounds good. Are you going to do some little introduction first, and then Melinda, and then me?
Yep.
Yes.
That's going to be our order. And then actually, Melinda, while I'm kind of doing the first introduction slides, if you could go ahead and continue to admit people, that would be great.
It pops up for me too, so I can do that if Melinda's talking.
Oh, I better make you post.
Are we ready to admit them?
Yep, I will go ahead and admit all.
Hello.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us on the phone. Welcome to the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network information session titled Introducing the Tribal Climate Adaptation Online Guidebook. My name is Krista Haringa, and I'm the coordinator for the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network. And I am from, live, and work on the traditional territory of the Lower Tanana Dene people. And this is also where our offices are located, the International Arctic Research Center. Just a few reminders. Please make sure you go ahead and mute yourself. If you are calling in on the phone, I think we do have a few people who are on the phone. You can go ahead and press *6, which should mute your phone. And you can also unmute your phone by pressing *6. We'll have a Q&A at the very end of the session, so you should be able to unmute yourself at that point. Also, just as a reminder, this session is being recorded. And I just want to give a really brief introduction or overview of the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network. The goal of the Learning Network is to really create a community of learning, sharing, and support of tribes and Indigenous communities that are responding to current and future impacts of climate change. So we're really glad that you're here today. There's a few different ways that you can participate in the Learning Network. This is one of them. But we also do provide one-on-one technical support for tribes and communities working in climate change adaptation. We have an e-bulletin that goes out once a month, and that's a combination of different events, resources, and opportunities in climate change adaptation. And we also have different events. We just finished up a climate change adaptation 101 training last week. So the e-bulletin and our listserv are both good ways to hear about those kinds of events. And with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to Melinda Chase to go ahead and introduce this session and our speaker.
Hello, everybody. Good to see some familiar faces and names on the list of people that are attending today. Some of you who were just here last week, I see that you're on, Jacob, and others that I haven't seen in a while. Great to have you here and to participate. I'm happy to be profiling. We're happy to be profiling the online version of the new Tribal Climate Adaptation Guidebook. And I really just wanted to start off and emphasize a key message that is in the status of tribes and climate change report. The report came out last year in 2021. I think we were still, moving out of COVID. I don't know if it got profiled as much as it could have, but it's a great report because it has so many different Indigenous authors, contributors, as well as people working with tribes. And the key message that comes out of the chapter 3. I'm going to stop for a moment. Can we have everybody put themselves on mute?
I think it's if there's one or two people calling in on the phone. If you have called in on the phone, could you go ahead and press *6? We're getting a lot of background noise. Thank you so much.
There we go. Okay. Well, so the status of tribes and climate change report has this key message, and it really highlights that tribes have been investing in adaptation planning and really looking at what their community and their membership needs and doing cutting edge work. And I think this is critical to recognize. Much of the tribal climate resilience funding that is out from BIA came from the request of tribes to the Obama administration saying we need resources to be addressing and planning for the impacts that we're now experiencing. And so I think it's just really important to recognize that. But there hasn't been a lot of resources that speak to us as Indigenous people. And yet, and this was recognized, it was recognized by BIA and Adaptation International and several other people. One of our early tribal liaisons, April Taylor, and go ahead, next slide. They recognize this because, next slide, Krista. Because really, adaptation planning can be overwhelming, right? Many of us are new to a lot of the material that comes through the climate science. We're trying to learn how to access it, how to read that information. But at the community front, we're dealing with a lot of other issues, right? We might have tribal staff turnover, demands on our time when we're trying to juggle our subsistence lifestyle and be to attend million meetings, trying to understand scenarios, how to get the best community involvement. And so these are all dynamics, whether you are supporting tribes and working in service of forwarding adaptation planning, or whether you're on the ground in your community, applying for a grant or trying to put together a planning document like an adaptation plan or to mainstream. So in recognition of this, BIA put some resources towards creating this tribal adaptation guide. So next slide. Oh, back a slide. So the adaptation guidebook was originally published in 2018, and it's a hard copy, and there's a PDF version online. Many of you have maybe seen it or flipped through it, and it's great that it was hard copy available because, of course, we have so much connectivity issues across tribal nations, in particular here in Alaska. And the strength, of the adaptation guidebook is it really is there to serve tribes. It speaks to our issues as Indigenous people. It has topical sections of the guidebook that can stand alone. You can, flip to a part of it and look at a whole issue. Look at a whole section on how do you have strong community involvement, and read some ideas about that and ways to go about it. And so it has topical sections that can stand alone and be used independently. And most of the examples and the topics are definitely relevant because it's a book that's written for us. But what I'm so excited about today is that we're going to look at that being out available online. But before I do, I have 2 more slides. So Krista, next slide. So we were able to use the guidebook, and I just want to give you an example in a project that we had between 2018 and 2020, and it was our Building Resilience Today project. And we primarily used the guidebook as a reference and gave it to those who were in the training to read those specific sections or be able to reference them, particularly like in the area of looking at projections. You know, there's a whole section on that. How do you understand, you know, climate scenarios and climate projections? How do you look at your traditional land use area with those projections? And then it has a section on traditional knowledge. And so it was a guidebook that we primarily used for reference. Next slide, Krista. And you know how that also played out. I already mentioned this section that helped us guide the participants in understanding climate projections. And that, you know, there's a lot of technical knowledge in looking at and applying climate science in adaptation planning, and you know, and other information sessions we've talked about, you know, using accessible language. And the guidebook has a glossary in there that goes hand in hand with the sections. And another way, for those of you who are working with tribes, we use certain sections of the guidebook to develop exercises and activities for our training. One in particular, there's a grid that talks about the different types of approaches to adaptation planning. And so we were able to design an activity sort of analyzing or looking at different adaptation plans that have been done across Alaska, and then saying, oh, this plan is like a food security plan, and this plan addresses more infrastructure. And so being able to use the guidebook in any kind of training that you're doing. So with that, so a little bit of background about its uses, and hopefully those of you who are online will definitely check out the hard copy. But what we're excited about today is that Sasha, who's with us from Adaptation International, and he does work across tribal nations. He's done several projects with the BIA Tribal Climate Resilience program, is here to tell you about the online version. So Sasha, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Melinda. Thanks, Krista. And thanks everyone for joining the Learning Network call today. My name is Sasha Peterson. I'm the director and founder of Adaptation International. We're a small mission-driven organization that has partnered with about 24 tribes on their climate resilience efforts across the country, from Alaska all the way through the Midwest. And I'm just happy to have the opportunity to show you kind of the new, hopefully improved version of the guidebook, and the way the information that is in that 2018 PDF was translated to hopefully make it more accessible and useful in an online format. I'm calling in from Austin, Texas right now, which is where I live with my 2 daughters who are 9 and 11 and are luckily in school at the moment. It's the traditional lands of the Alabama Coshada and Caddo people, as well as a number of tribes who have passed through this area over the centuries. I'm actually originally from Homer, Alaska, so I grew up in Homer, and that's the lands of the Dena'ina people. And my parents are still there. We were just up there a few weeks ago, spent a good chunk of the summer there, and I'm planning to come back up in November. And coincidentally, it turns out to be my parents' anniversary today. So on that, I will bring up my screen and share some info on the online version of the guidebook. And Krista, if people want to, as we're going, if you're online and you want to type in a question, or if you want to raise your hand, I'm happy to have this kind of be an informal conversation. I'm going to share some of the background and the resources that are available in the online guidebook version, but I don't want to, have a question hang us up. So if something, need clarification or something doesn't make sense, please feel free to jump in, though there'll be more time for question and answer at the end. Here's a picture of Ketchimak Bay from a hike we did this summer. You all are, know Alaska, but when I've shared presentations in other places, it's nice to give people a little glimpse of, the area that grounds me and, reconnects my soul, which doesn't happen to be Austin, Texas, but happens to be Alaska. I also want to share a quick story about how tribes across the country, as you know, are using information and data in order to develop adaptation and resilience plans, better understand the climate-related risk, and develop efforts to prepare for those future changes. Some of the most rewarding moments I've had partnering with tribes on their resilience efforts have come as they start to wrestle with these challenging issues and develop solutions that are relevant to the community, that respect their traditional and indigenous knowledges, and holistically help support the community as a whole. And one example of that is some work that we were doing a couple of years ago with the Lac des Flambeaux tribe in northern Wisconsin. The person presenting there is Eric Chapman, who was a council member at the time and the head of the environmental department that was leading this BIA resilience project. And they went so far as engaging with one of their cultural and spiritual leaders to come up with a resilience logo for their project and their initiative. And, it was more than just translating, what does climate resilience mean into Ojibwe, but it was also thinking about what does that concept mean for them? And you can see two of their traditional clans are highlighted in that logo, with the eagle and the muskrat. And then the eagle's holding the war club to protect the wigwam, their traditional home, from these challenges that are going to be imposed by climate change for the community. So it's not something that I could do as not being a tribal member with them, but in their reflections and decisions about how to move forward in addressing climate change, they created a way to make it resonate with their broader community, which I think is a great example of one of the tribal examples that are highlighted throughout the guidebook. When we thought about building a tribal climate adaptation guidebook back in 2018, the question was why is this resource useful? Or we didn't know Melinda would be using it to create, tools or resources or, support some of the on the ground effort. But we knew that tribes across the country had been leading efforts to prepare for climate change. It's been something that's been challenging communities across the country and across the world, and tribes are at the forefront of developing really robust and innovative ways to respond to those challenges. We also knew at the time that no other guidebooks were focused on tribes. As Melinda mentioned, there aren't a lot of resources that are geared specifically for tribes and the issues, and kind of talk about some of the nuances that are relevant for tribal communities that are not relevant in the Western setting. There's a famous guidebook that was developed by Ickley in King County, Washington about 20 years ago, but it definitely didn't have tribal perspectives in mind. And then the guidebook itself helps to identify opportunities for braiding together traditional knowledges and Western science. In adaptation, we know that those traditional knowledges can be really important in better understanding vulnerability and risk, but also developing effective adaptation actions. And so the guidebook highlights how other tribes have thought about braiding those ways of knowing together in support of their community resilience efforts. Sorry, moving my little Zoom window. So one of the things the guidebook, both online and the hard copy version, tries to do is really ground the knowledge and information on adaptation planning and the adaptation journey in the work that tribes have been doing. And so it has a number of quotes and information drawn from tribes that have been working on resilience. So we know that tribes are always been good at adaptation. You know, it's been challenged. Many tribal communities have been challenged by Western civilization, and now climate change is adding to those challenges. We know that tribes are strong and resilient people and have lived on these lands since time immemorial, and they'll continue to flourish even in the midst of climate change. Joe Durglo said that our lands are resources for the basis of our spiritual life. It's been our way since time began in preparing for environmental change. We can mitigate threats to our ways of life. And then Gary Morishima said that adaptation has long been a part and parcel of Indigenous communities. Indeed, you know, the very survival and continuity of people depends on successful response to change. And that sort of perspective is, you know, not that common in Western communities. And it gives me, you know, really a lot of hope and invigorates the work that I do in the world of climate change by partnering with tribal communities. So Melinda mentioned this first version of the guidebook. It is available still online. It's linked through the online guidebook. It's available through Oregon State University as well. And the framework that was developed in the 2018 version by a large group of tribal advisors, as well as a core team that included some tribal members, folks from the Oregon State University and the NOAA RISA program there, the Oregon Climate Change Research Institute, and then our team at Adaptation International. The framework is still there. It's just been translated from, you know, the PDF version into an online guidebook. You can see here on the left-hand side, this graphic shows the 5 major steps for a resilience planning effort. It starts with the step in the middle, centering the tribe's adaptation effort, and then identifying concerns and gathering information is step 2. Step 3 is assessing vulnerability. Step 4 is planning for action. And step 5 is implementing and monitoring those actions. And then, of course, we're not done adapting and preparing for climate change at that point, but you can start over and continue to address new challenges or refine your approaches for addressing the challenges that have already been identified. And you can see with this icon and graphic how multiple knowledges and multiple ways of knowing, in particular traditional knowledges, can be woven in and support the process in any of those phases. And it's really up to the tribe to decide, you know, at what point and how and whether it makes sense to incorporate those type of knowledges in support of an adaptation planning effort. There are also a number of key features from the guidebook. So each step had a checklist. And this text might be a little bit hard to read, so I'll show you in a moment what it looks like on the online version. There are checkpoints, ways to kind of just check with the planning team or check in on the project and see if traditional knowledges should be incorporated or how they've been incorporated by other tribes. Check in on checkpoints on community engagement, where other tribes have found in the process is a great place to gather community input, share information, or refine adaptation actions. And then documentation, you know, it's really difficult to pull together all the information at the end of a project. So if you pull it together over the course of the project, it makes it easier to send in those grant reports and do those things. A couple other resources that are available in both versions. One is the guiding questions. So as you start a section, there'll be questions that help guide that effort or that step or activity. What was called case studies in the original version is now called tribal examples and has been expanded a little, but by no means does it incorporate everything from every tribe. And the effort to move it into an online version didn't really include, you know, capturing all the new information that has happened. There have been a few updates, but it's not a comprehensive list of tribal resilience efforts in 2022. And then lists and connections to resources that can continue to support tribal adaptation planning. The PDF did as good a job as a PDF can, I think, in terms of being able to make it accessible and easy to navigate. You know, there are ways to click to different steps or different activities. So as Melinda said, you can sort of choose your own adventure and pick where, if the tribe is focused on a specific sector or project or doing a specific phase of the adaptation planning process, like the resources will be as easy as possible to find in that setting. But the number one piece of feedback that we received after that first guidebook was published is, can you make this online and interactive? It's great to have the information in one place, but 100+ pages in a PDF is really not as useful as it could be. So luckily, with some additional funding through NOAA and the Oregon Climate Change Research Institute, we're able to invest in translating the guidebook content into an online guidebook. You'll see the URL here in a minute, and maybe Krista, you could drop it into the chat, but it's Tribal Climate Adaptation Guidebook.org, long but descriptive. And you can see here that here's the homepage. I'll just show you a few screenshots and kind of orient you through the presentation, and then we can go over to the live tool, but you're welcome to follow along by bringing up Tribal Climate Adaptation Guidebook.org if you want. You can see here's that same icon. In this case, when you're online, it's interactive, so you can click on those different steps in the process to be able to move to that part of the guidebook. Just quick comparison between the two versions. There's version 1 had a tribal advisory group. It was funded by the North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative when that was still around, the Oregon Climate Change Research Institute. Had those 100 pages. There's traditional ecological knowledge and traditional knowledge's guidance, mostly through the Climate and Traditional Knowledge's Working Group guidelines. And as I said, it was a clickable PDF. Version 2, which is now available, was funded again through NOAA, has a different and expanded tribal advisory group, revised and streamlined content. Hopefully, surprising, just honestly to me, it took a lot. You can't just take, the paragraphs that are in the PDF version and put them on a web page and expect it to work, which I didn't really know when we started the project. And then there's a little bit of updated content, some new resources, some new tribal examples, and some new best practices on incorporating traditional knowledges. And then of course, this online interactive website that was beta tested. So for this version of the project, here are the advisors. Thank you, Melinda, for being part of that team. April, Kathy, Daniel, Emma, Althea, and Rachel, as well as Amber. And then our project team was the good folks at the Oregon Climate Change Research Institute, as well as our team at Adaptation International and a web developer, Daniel Bissett, and some of the other folks at Oregon who really helped turn this vision into a reality. And obviously we couldn't have done it without the web developer either, with We Rock Digital Marketing. So here's the new guidebook, again, focused on those 5 steps. There's the URL that Krista dropped into the chat if you happen to be on the computer or have a computer available. There are multiple ways to get to any of the steps and activities. At the top, there's a guidebook menu. So you can click on the guidebook menu and then see each of the steps and then navigate over to each of the different activities. When you're in a step, you can see here there are these like little radio dial buttons that also allows you to navigate within that step to each of the different activities in the step. And then many of those same guiding features, the guiding questions and checklists are available. So here's the home page for step 4. You can see the 5 activities at the top there. And kind of the overall, what's happening in this step. And then if you scroll down, you can see there's a checklist for the actions that the tribe would want to accomplish in that step. There's a list of the content that you can follow through. And then there's a quick link to all the tribal examples that are connected to that step. So if you're really thinking about adaptation action planning, and then you want to see what tribes have been doing in that space, you can click on the tribal example components. And then if you scroll down, it'll take each of the activities sequentially. You can look at, what is the main idea for the activity, what's the purpose, and then it provides guidance on completing that activity. And if there are sub-steps, down in the bottom portion of that page, under the yellow bar, specific descriptions with links to tribal examples. And then under that leading image there are the guiding questions for that step, as well as how, guidance on traditional knowledges. The guidance on traditional knowledges, we worked with the working group, the traditional knowledges working group, and had permission to republish those guidelines on the Tribal Climate Adaptation Guidebook webpage. So in the About section, you'll see there, each of those guidelines with their descriptions has been replicated onto the guidebook website, in addition to the website that they maintain. So hopefully that keeps it a little more streamlined and provides the information, is closer to people's fingertips versus navigating back and forth between different websites. As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the strengths, I think, of the guidebook are the tribal examples. So you can see here is a little snapshot of the summary of tribal examples. There are dozens of tribal examples. They each have their own kind of landing page. And if you click on the page for a specific tribe, and this is for the native villages of St. Mary and Pitcairn Point, there's a little mini description of it, as well as a map and location of where the tribe is located. And then there are links specifically to that tribe or relevant web pages, and a profile like with the BIA or with the Pacific Northwest Tribal Climate Guide. And then it also links to where that tribe's efforts have been highlighted in the guidebook. It's not to say that the guidebook captures by any means all that a tribe is doing. It just pulls in and incorporates examples from some of the work that the tribes have been doing and where that work is highlighted in the guidebook. And then I think almost finally, this list of resources is, again, hopefully more accessible instead of being in a table or an appendix to the PDF. There's a description of the resource. There's the title, which will click through specifically to that resource. So you can open that in a new tab if you want to pull in information from it, as well as who created it and a mini description and where it's used in the guidebook. All right, so with that, I think I'm going to pause for a second, Krista, and see if there are any burning questions, and then have a little interactive activity, and we'll bring up the online guidebook, and everybody who is on a computer and available could do that as well.
Thanks, Sasha. There aren't any questions that have come up in the chat so far, but if folks want to, oh, here we go. From Adelheid Herman, what is the organization, Sasha, that you're with?
Yeah, I'm with Adaptation International. So we're a small mission-driven organization. We have a distributed team. So I'm in Austin. We have someone in Fort Collins. We, until a couple of months ago, had someone in Kodiak, but she's moved on to a new position. So we just work on kind of bridging the gap between the climate science world, the universities, the academics, and then the on the ground community action. And we've been working in this space for about 13 years, since 2010. It's 12 years. And I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to collaborate with tribes throughout that process and try and help communities build resilience, both in the tribal context and in the Western context. No problem. All right, so I'd like to, Chris, it's okay if we shift into kind of getting your hands dirty or moving your mouse around a little?
Please do.
Okay, so here's your challenge. If you're on the computer or have access to one that's on the side, can you find and identify what is step 1, activity 6 in the guidebook? So I'll give you about a minute and then I'll show you how I would find that information. All right, hopefully you have found it. There are a couple ways to go. If you want to play around with it, you won't get yourself in trouble. You can just click around and find it. Someone in the chat said that she got it. Good job, Anna. Let's see, step 1, activity 6. So a couple ways you can click, see how each of these portions of the main icon are clickable. You could click on step 1 there. And then it'll take you to step 1, which has all that information that we were talking about for the step as itself. And then along the top, it tells you all the activities in step 1. So step 1, activity 6 is engagement here. The other way, you could go up to the guidebook menu. You could go to step 1, slide down and find activity 6. So tribal community engagement. And it gives you kind of what's the, in one sentence, what is that step about? Why does it matter in a quote from a tribe? And then these guiding questions and each of the different subsets of action that you would want to take potentially, or at least consider taking, or this information could guide how the tribe chooses to move forward in that step of engagement. All right, going back to the PowerPoint. Next question. How many guiding questions are there for step 4, activity 4? Okay, there's some comments coming in. Yep, answers to the previous questions. Okay, if you find this answer, just don't type it into the chat quite yet. But if you find how many guiding questions are there for step 4, activity 4, and when I go back to the website, then you can type it in. There's some comments that the website's user-friendly. Good. Progress from the PDF, it sounds like. All right, if you found how many guiding questions there are, feel free to drop that into the chat. See a couple 8s and a 3, 5. Does any brave soul want to guide my mouse and tell me where to go to find that information?
I use guidebook menu on top.
Okay, guidebook menu. And then what?
Scroll down to step 4, and then there will be a few icons. I scrolled down. Yeah.
Step 4, activity 4, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Click
then
on
if you scroll down, you'll see guiding questions.
Okay, but there's no number with it. What did you do?
Read more.
All right. So yeah, in this case, there are 8 guiding questions for this activity that are good to think about, or other tribes have used to help kind of guide their choices when they're going to implementing, in this case, implementing their plans or actions, like what partnerships are required, what's the timing, how far in the future will the implementation be checked on. Awesome. All right, you're doing, everyone, this seems to get this very easily. Okay, last one. What is one tribal example that is highlighted in step 5? And how many tribal examples are there for step 5? Please take 30 seconds on your own to figure it out before chatting anything, and then drop your answers into chat. All right, has anybody been able to track down that information? tribal examples. Someone said the Macaw Indian tribe is highlighted. Step 5. Marshall Island is another one that might be highlighted, and 9 total examples from Jacob. Betsy agrees, 9 examples. All right, who's willing to be brave and talk us through how you got there? Brooke says the native village of Newtalk is also highlighted in
Ooh, nice.
that example. Let's see. Any brave souls? Step 5. All right, there are a number of ways. Oh, Jennifer has her hand up. Jennifer, can you unmute yourself and share?
Yeah, I was going to say you can just go ahead and go to the guidebook menu
Okay,
and then drop down to step 5
okay,
and then click on that. And then on the right-hand side, there's step 5 tribal examples.
perfect. See what happens. There we go. Nice. That's great. Thank you, Jennifer, for guiding us through that, and you found them. And then for each tribe here, you could click on the read more and it'll bring up that page that summarizes the tribe, its location, and the profiles for those tribes as well as where they're highlighted. We go back for a second. The other cool feature I just wanted to show you is here on this right-hand side. It's kind of a word cloud, but it's the different steps, the different regions. So if you did click on step 5 here, it should bring up the same page with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 examples. But if you wanted to find out for step 2, you could click there on step 2. It would bring up the examples that are highlighted there. And then also you could click Alaska, for example, up here in the top, and it would bring up all the current tribal examples from Alaska. So this is definitely, an area where hopefully this online framework for the guidebook could be expanded over time, as more examples are completed, or, we can just, as the work that all of you are doing becomes relevant and could be tied to the guidebook to support each wave of community that is addressing climate change, those could be added into the guidebook.
Sasha, we have a question. Looks like Jennifer has her hand raised.
Sure, Jennifer.
Lower it.
Okay. No problem. All right, well, discussion and questions. I think, we have 10 or 15 minutes for that. If people have any questions, comments, responses, ideas, anything they want to talk about with the guidebook. Krista points out that you can still access the PDF version of the guidebook. And, one of the things, Melinda, that you said that really resonated with me is I hope the guidebook, both the PDF version and the online version, can really support tribes in whatever phase of the planning process they are, or implementation of actions. It may be that there's grant funding that's specific to, a vulnerability assessment, and it may be specific to certain sectors. So you could go and see what other tribes have done in their vulnerability assessment, what examples are out there, and then be able to hopefully use that information to kind of customize the approach that makes sense. Because we know every community, every nation is different. And so using this information probably isn't an exact fit, but hopefully it creates that framework and structure and is flexible enough that maybe you're just doing a community engagement portion of a project and want those examples or guiding questions or thoughts about how traditional knowledge could fit in and support that portion of the project, then you could find it in the guidebook. It's definitely not designed to be, read cover to cover necessarily. And I think with the online version, it really helps enhance that flexibility of being able to navigate between steps, between activities, and find information that's relevant to the ones that may be specific to your community or to a specific project.
Looks like we have another question. Jacqueline has asked in the chat. There is clearly a lot of great work going on. Oh, it's a comment. Oh no, it's a question. There's clearly a lot of great work going on here. How do they build their team to share the workload in order to get this far in the process? Are you talking about the booklet itself, Jacqueline? Or are you talking about some of the individual plans?
So, just these examples that we're looking at, they're so inspiring, and each tribe has got to start their own climate adaptation assessments and work. I just feel like, Alaska needs a lot of help. Really interested in doing more work in Alaska, as well as the lower 48 tribes. With the Typhoon Mirbeck, the FEMA is finally getting help to those villages. It's almost like we need these assessments done and also work to help mitigate already. Like, it needs to be happening at the same time, because like the change is happening so fast, we can't really assess it. We have to be boots on the ground already.
Yeah, 100%. Like, Alaska is on the front lines of climate change. Like, we're dealing with the impacts first and more severely than most of the rest of the continent, honestly. And so you're right, like, it's already here, and you have to sort of build the airplane as it's flying, right? We can't stop and make the perfect thing. We just have to start doing things. But hopefully, the waves of efforts that have happened with tribal communities over the last 10 to 15 years can support and make this next, wave of action more valuable and easier. It's not easy to do the work, but it might be easier to find the actions or the approach or that might be the best fit for the community, given that communities have already been doing this for 15 years on the climate change front, but for decades and centuries on the change side of things.
It's almost like coastal communities, like in the Nome area, where a lot of the change is happening really fast and really intensely. You have to have these strategies of who's going to help support these neighboring villages. And there is actually support going on for those areas. There's some villages that are making frames for houses and barging them up. So the people who lost their homes completely due to damage are getting, framework built for them. And it's really inspiring. People are doing such good work. We need to show our support. And I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm really in awe of all the work and how easy it is to share this information. And I hope you guys explore coming to Alaska for the Alaska Forum on the Environment, or the Alaska Tribal Environmental Managers Conference with ANTHC, because those are our Alaskan environmental workers that would love to hear your information.
Great. Thank you, Jacqueline. Yes, I think the more we all spread information about various resources, and particularly those who are helping to create them. It makes a difference. It looks like Sasha, there's a couple of other comments in the chat here. Deborah Lynn asked, what benefit does an adaptation plan provide from a hazard mitigation plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think more and more communities are moving towards climate smart hazard planning as one way to quote unquote mainstream climate preparedness into plans that are already required. What I've seen some communities do is think about an adaptation plan as more the holistic process, the way to kind of look across sectors, across natural resource departments and infrastructure and economic development and, housing, where typically and historically hazard mitigation plans, FEMA has expected it to be much more human and infrastructure focused. So it's been difficult to include our plant and animal relatives in those conversations and how environmental change is affecting those issues. Though some tribes like the Lacte tribe that I showed you do now have FEMA approved climate smart hazard mitigation plans that identify plant and animal epidemics as one of their top hazards to their community, culture, their food security, and their way of life. So it's becoming more prevalent, but it feels to me like hazard mitigation plan is like one way to take the climate preparedness effort and put it into action. There are other ways, like housing or infrastructure planning or, forest management plans or, particular species plans that, could be other avenues to mainstream the action and make sure that it helps stay and get implemented.
Yeah, I think the access to the funding for hazard mitigation plan is really key. And it looks like, Eric has a really strong comment, and I think it's something that, we grappled with the advisory committee in terms of, how do we continue to add to this resource, make it accessible. But Sasha, can you see his comment there? It says, it looks like the examples some of them are over 10 years old. Is there an effort to get updated information?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Eric and Melinda, too. The funding that was available to, enhance the guidebook and go from the PDF to the online version wasn't enough to do kind of a comprehensive look at, new approaches or new plans that have been published or new efforts. But is it encouraging to me that, at least it was a step. So it's not version 2.0 of the guidebook, really, it's version 1.5. And hopefully it's more accessible and, some things have been updated, but, with the BIA resilience funding, that's an area where, it could be the network here or a number of tribes could come together and say, hey, we know a lot more has been happening in Alaska. We need some funding to just be able to document it and bring it into, support future tribal planning efforts. And the guidebook could be a way to house that information. Melinda, I don't know if you remember, but one of your early comments on the advisory group was that, it'd be great to have more storytelling involved in the guidebook. And so we explored some ways to start to do that. And there are those quotes and the tribal examples, but to me, it's not where it could be, so another thing we've talked about is, could there be the potential for getting funding to document some of the tribal stories? It's possible to embed a video in that website that highlights, how does the planning happen? For each of the steps, there could be a video of tribal staff members or community members talking about the work that's happening in specific efforts. But that's, a whole another level of effort and time and funding and money that just wasn't available for this phase of the project.
Yeah, I think that, trying to keep things relevant and, but to recognize even some of the work that's being done across the tribes, there isn't a vast amount of information in this book, but definitely, we want to keep things current. So that's going to be an area that we explore, hopefully. And the more we hear that back from folks, I think that's a positive thing. Adelaide had a comment here too. She said that including adaptation / mitigation planning into the economic development community economic development SEDS plans is happening in some regions. And I think, that is a really good point, is that you have some areas that are doing their adaptation planning and then folding it into economic opportunity, workforce development opportunity. And I'm not sure, Sasha, are you familiar enough with any of the resources on the online version? Is there a way to query any of that?
There are ways to do it. So let's see here. I don't know enough about economic development plans to know exactly how they're incorporated, but you can on the guidebook in a couple of ways. You can search here. So you could search economic development or economic development plans. And then you could see the search results. Let's see, it brings it up in step 1 in this North Olympic Development Council example, and then in resources. And then if you clicked on it, it would take you to that page, which provides probably too many resources because this one isn't filtered by those search results. And you'd have to, then you could search again for economic and see where it comes up. So adaptation grants comes up there, but yeah, that's sounds like another great way to mainstream adaptation action and give it, an area where it can actually be implemented.
Thank you. Well, are there any other comments or questions? We're getting close to the hour, and I think we just have a couple of closing slides with announcements. But last call, and it looks like there's one of the last pages from Sasha about how to download it.
It looks like someone has their hand up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Melinda, it's Adelaide. Yeah, Sasha, you mentioned climate smart holistic sector, and that's the only words I got. Was that a process, or was that just talking about including, like a holistic approach?
Well, we were talking about the difference between like a hazard plan and an adaptation plan. And in general, adaptation plans can be more holistic, though you could choose to take it sector by sector. And then I was saying that there's been a move to make hazard mitigation planning what I'm calling climate smart, so that it's incorporating climate projections into the hazards and risk assessments. So you're not just, FEMA typically look to historical data to determine climate-related and extreme weather risk, but now there's a push to incorporate future climate projections into that, so it could be climate smart hazard planning. So you're preparing for the, extreme weather of the future, not just the extreme weather of the past. But no matter if you do it holistically or do it one sector at a time, like it all needs to be done, and whatever makes the most sense for, each individual community is the way to pursue that.
Great.
Before you do your announcements, I just want to do a couple quick things. One, here again is the URL for the guidebook, Tribal Climate Adaptation Guidebook.org. I also want to leave you with this quote from Beverly Crum, who is a Shopai elder. And she said, what we're seeing on the Oahe is probably due to less water, but what else? Hot days, it's gotten very hot, but let's not leave it there. What do we do about it? And so my hope is that the Tribal Climate Adaptation Guidebook is a resource that can continue to help tribal communities take action to enhance community resilience moving forward. And here's my contact information too. So feel free, if there's something occurs to you or great ideas about how to make the guidebook better, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you, Sasha. Looks like we're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat here, and Krista's going to pull up just a final slide about, of course, our contact, but the announcements. Krista, did you want to go over any of these, or?
Let's see here. The first one is the capital project fund deadline was extended. I think initially the deadline was in September. It's now due this Friday, October 14th. And so if that's something that your tribe has not yet applied for, the AFN Navigators program is ready to support tribes that want to put in applications for that. Next is the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, which is a partner of the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network, is going to be hosting a Alaska Regional Conference next week, October 19th in Anchorage, so right before AFN. And Melinda, I think you had a couple of other events you wanted to highlight. If I could just pass it on to you.
Yeah, I added the Afn Tribal Conference, and I just want to stress if you want to take a look at that agenda, because it is there's going to be some key presentations. One is going to include the impacts of the typhoon Merbok. Melanie Baki is presenting there, and then they're going to have a presentation on internet broadband connectivity, and then several other areas, some on governance. So you might want to take a look at that agenda. And then there's a forthcoming National Tribal Leaders Climate Summit that ATNI, affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, is putting on the end of the month, November 28th to the 30th. So that's the second time that they're doing that. And I guess the last is really good. So go ahead and check those out, and great to have you all here today. Thank you. Oh, somebody said they should have gone to AFN. You know we're going to have fun next week, right? Visiting. So anyhow, thank you all, and we're happy that you joined us today. And be safe. Take care. Good day. Thank you.